In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report on what they called our epidemic of loneliness and isolation. According to the report, the problem of loneliness isn't just about feeling down. It's actually one of the greatest threats to the health of our bodies and our society as a whole. Loneliness is linked to a higher risks of heart problems, strokes, dementia, depression and anxiety, and even premature death. The threat of loneliness and isolation to our bodies, according to that report, is similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Maybe that's why, in the very first book of the Bible, God says the words, "It is not good for man to be alone." Whether we're looking at church spaces, workplaces, or our local community, one of the greatest causes of isolation is grief. Now, grief comes to us from all sorts of different areas in our lives. It could be a parent passing away, or the end of a marriage, or a close friendship. It could come from conflict in our families, or abuse and trauma. Even the feelings of failure that we take on when life just doesn't turn out how we thought it would. All of these experiences, they can weigh us down and begin to separate us from our social connections. At its heart, Christianity was always meant to bring people together. In the New Testament, we see a group of people who shared each other's burdens and paid attention to each other's needs. They looked out for each other. They were connected, and in the best of times, they were a safe place for each other. Imagine if that's what church felt like to us when we were grieving today. But we often find something else in church when we're going through hard times now. There's a pressure to get over it all. We're often met with cliches and empty sentiments, rather than the kind of true connection we read about in the early days of Christianity. Hannah Wachter is a grief recovery coach, currently serving in the greater Portland area, and also leads as the minister of music for the Pleasant Valley Church in Happy Valley, Oregon. For our conversation today, we decided to do something a little different. We took our conversation with Hannah and split it into the next 2 episodes as we focus on how we can make Christian spaces and Christian people safe again for grief. We'll explore all that and more on this episode of Bridges Over Walls.
A little over a year ago, like a year and 2 months ago, my mom passed away very unexpectedly. She had a stroke on a Thursday, and then that following Thursday, she was gone. That was probably the longest week of my life. Like, it was just so intense. I am a very open person. I don't mind sharing who I am, and I have a very public social media presence, and so I just did what I always do, which was just share what I was going through, and I shared a lot of how I was handling my grief and my mom's loss. I shared that very publicly on my social media pages. And I was really shocked at the responses I got. It was either one of 2 things. It was either people who meant well, wanted to encourage me and comfort me, but just said things that really missed the mark and were actually more hurtful as I was grieving and caused me to feel all of these other extra emotions that I didn't need to feel when I'm bogged down in grief. And then there were people who were so thankful that I was sharing publicly and just naming how I was feeling and talking about my experience and not apologizing for the way that I was feeling. And I would get these responses like, wow, your boldness is really helping me process the loss of my brother that I haven't even talked to people about in 7 years. And so I'm sitting there thinking, wow, we're either really insensitive or we're really hungry to talk to somebody about what we're going through when we're grieving. And there's got to be this middle ground. There's got to be a safe space for people. I think the tradition of wearing black was a really wise thing that we did way back in the day, because wearing black was just a signifier or a symbol for people to know, like, hey, this person just went through something hard. They're hurting. Like, give them space. Look, I'm a girl with purple hair, and like I want to be expressive in color, but I still want people to know, like, hey, I just went through something. I really do need you to be gentle with me. So I made this button. It says, please be gentle with me. I'm grieving, because as a society, we've lost the capacity to be gentle and sensitive with each other. And so amazing responses from people like baristas and checkout clerks and like other, And so a friend of mine at my kickboxing studio came up to me and was telling me how much she appreciated that button. And she told me about this thing called the grief recovery method. And she was like, have you ever heard of it? And I was like, no, I haven't. So I looked into it for my kids. But as I started looking into it, I was like, this is the space. This is the thing that people need because it just left room for people in their hurt and in all different types of losses. There's actually over 40 different kinds of losses that we can experience in life. It's not just death. And so I instantly was drawn into that. And I instantly was like, absolutely, I'm going to get certified in this program and offer the gift of listening to other people. And for me, it felt like also a purposeful way to honor my own pain and my mom and other things like that. So I'm an advanced grief recovery specialist, which is just a fancy way that I can talk with people about their grief online or in person. But
grief is kind of a tough subject in the Christian church because I feel like we can be some of the worst people in knowing how to deal with it. I definitely, one of the things, we'll probably get into this a little later, but, I think about the times where I've been going through the most trauma or the most just hard points of life. And like how hard it is to get myself to go to church during those times, like how much I don't want to be there.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And part of the reason is because of the expectation of what I'll find, like how people will handle me and what they'll say in response to just needing to be heard and needing to be sad.
It's easy to succumb to grief. The pull of grief, it's like a tide that's just like pulling you under. Yeah. And so you also have to make a conscious choice. Like, am I always going to be in this deep space of grief or am I going to allow myself to have moments of walking away from that and that doesn't dishonor the person I love or what I've lost, doesn't dishonor them. It just means I can't always live under the weight of it. I remember being really grateful for my little nephews being around because they're kids and like they have felt needs. And in some way that was great to be distracted with their felt needs and just like keep them entertained and like, let's watch a movie. Kind of thing. So,
you're going through this and you and your family, there's kind of this internal conversation, right? This experience that you're going through together. At some point, the rest of the world becomes aware of what you're going through, right? And suddenly everyone's eyes and opinions and thoughts get turned. I mean, I'm picturing like a Lord of the Rings Eye of Sauron, like just kind of turning on to your traumatic, situation. And you had mentioned, in some previous conversations, just some of the things that might be well-meaning, but just are not helpful and can be really damaging.
Oh, yeah.
Especially from, church people. We have kind of these cliche things almost. What are some examples of either things that people said to you that were unhelpful or, some of the ways that church folks just even think about these situations that does not help in any way and can damage the grieving person?
Yeah, that's, man. So my mom, we grew up in the same church our entire lives. Like, and my mom I guess she'd been at this church for like 40 years or something. So she was kind of like an institution at the church that we grew up in and beloved, like a wonderful woman. And I'm so grateful for the family feeling that we have within the church. But I think one thing that was very difficult during that time was the people that we grew up with in church were really like possessive over my mom in a way that really missed the mark in the way that was like, yes, but this is our mom. This, like this is our blood family. Like, yes, you love her and so grateful for that. But you're pushing in on this too much. You want to be in the center of things too much. You have to still know your boundaries, your limits, and your grief is not bigger than my grief in this. Like, this is my mother. Like, recognizing where your place is and how you can best serve the person going through grief, not making it about your grief or your need for information or your need to even serve that person, right? Because I think you can be well-meaning and be like, let's bring them meals, let's do all the stuff. And that's great. But sometimes even for the grieving person, like thinking about food or all that can even just be too much. You know, having one other person or another thing to manage is too much. Yes, the family of God is so important, but also that blood, that relational family, that family of origin, that nuclear family, they have their things that they're going through, and we need to make sure that we're honoring that. Comments that people would say, I mean, stuff like, well, God just wanted her in heaven with him. And I really hate that phrase, like, just to be frank. Like, I hate that because
like God took your mom.
Yeah. And that's not like, and I don't, and we say that God just wanted another angel or whatever. And I'm like, what is that? What? First of all, do humans turn into angels? I don't think so. And second of all, like, it sets up God as like this selfish God who takes from us and disregards our feelings. And that's not true at all. Another person in a church setting was like, their mom, I guess, had died when they were in a teenager. And she was like, well, you should just be grateful you had your mom as long as you had her. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah. I think in one of my posts, I had said, like, you can't meet someone who's going through emotional turmoil. You can't meet them with intellectual comments only, because that's irrelevant, like, to them. That doesn't, it might be factually true, you know, but it doesn't actually serve that person. So you're not leading with service. You're just trying to like put a little blanket pat statement over it. And that doesn't really help anybody. And she was like, well, you're being too harsh. You just need to give people more of the benefit of the doubt. And like, she shamed me. And I was like, wow, like, I can't even believe you're arguing with me. And also, this is just my experience of my grief and what I would like to see. Like, don't feel like you have to rush in and say something all the time to somebody. I feel like often grievers just want you to be there to listen to them versus trying to say an appropriate phrase to like fix it. People make these comments in sort of like, okay, well, they're there. You're going to be okay kind of thing. And we'll just fix it, you know. Well, time will heal. You'll be better in time. Just give it time. No, like, those statements they don't really actually serve.
Well, they're more about the person, right? It's like they're trying to alleviate their own discomfort. They're not trying to actually comfort you. They just don't want to be around the discomfort situation. They're still acting selfishly. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really the worst. And one thing that I appreciate, you mentioned there are over 40 different types of grief. I think that death of a loved one is definitely the thing that pops into people's minds a lot. But quick story, end of 2017, early 2019, it was just months before I moved to Oregon. I had the most devastating part of my adult life. A combination of things. So I didn't have one thing. I had like 10 things happen and they were horrible. Started Thanksgiving of 2018. My partner was driving from where we lived in South Carolina to Tennessee and was in a horrible car accident, multi-car.
Oh, gosh.
And I got a call from her phone and someone else's voice was on the other line. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm walking to church. This is a Saturday morning. I'm walking to church because she has our only car. In another state. I can't even get to her. And someone else is talking through the line. And I'm like, who is this? Why? You know, immediately, like, it's just like you feel like the panic. You know?
Like, absolutely.
And I'm just like, I can't do anything. I'm helpless. Like, I can't get there. What happened? It comes out like, hey, your wife was in a car accident. And I don't know what's next. I don't know what this person's going to say. She can't talk right now. And, you know, just like the fear of that. And eventually, you know, I was able to find out that she's able to talk and move around, but they're going to take her to the hospital. I have not seen her. I mean, this is someone else telling me secondhand what's happening. Thankfully, my mom was doing song service at the little church that day. And I ran into that church, just bust open the door, bawling my eyes out. And I just yell in the middle of a church service, Mom, we've got to go now.
Wow.
And my mom, I mean, she didn't even stop, ask nothing. She grabs her purse, stops the whole program, walks out, and we get in the car and she said, where were we going? And for hours, she was hours away.
Wow.
Right. And we drive in the car. We find out more information as the hours go by that our car has been totaled. It's been taken from us. We don't even know where it's going or where it's going to be. My wife is in the hospital and we get there and we're able to see her and pick her up. But I mean, there were months, I mean, years even where like it was hard for her to drive because of the trauma of that, right?
Yes.
So that's the first event in a 6-month, just awful things. I start having ethical problems with the way my company of 2.5 years is handling work. I have to quit my job.
Yeah.
Right. So we have this trauma. We have our one sole income at the time. She was in her last semester of college.
Oh, goodness,
I quit my job. I have to go back and work construction for my dad, states away to pay our bills.
Yeah.
I have another job lined up that they're like, hey, you're the only one we're interviewing. It's going to be a great job. You're going to have health insurance. And I'm strung along for a couple months. And then they say, hey, we went another direction.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Just this whole series of awful. It was the hardest time in my marriage. It was the hardest time career-wise. It was the hardest time, in all of these different directions. And really, I thought we were going to lose our house.
Yeah.
All of my college experience is a waste. I might lose my marriage. My wife, my best friend in the whole world forever since I was, 16 years old, might not be able to drive anymore.
Yeah.
All these things are coming together. And the thing that stuck out to me most is when I thought about church, it was the last place I wanted to be. The last place. Why? Right?
Yeah.
Why is it that the place that should represent Jesus?
That's right.
Why is it that the place that should be the people that love me most, the place that doesn't feel, is it the place that doesn't feel safe? Why is it the place that people are going to write off that experience, or they're going to try to move me quickly through it?
Yeah.
Right? Who's going to sit and process this with me? Who,
right.
And the people that did help me through that experience so often were not at the church I was going to. And that is what I want out of this conversation. If we can give anything to the world, can we make a group of people of faith that are the people you can run to?
That's right.
That are the people that when you go through these awful things, it's just natural to want to be around them.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And why is it not the case already?
Right.
So there's our wall. We're doing the bridges and walls.
Yeah.
Our wall is church isn't a safe place for grieving people.
Yeah.
Right. But I hope that kind of as we go through this and develop from kind of two different angles of grief, that we can kind of build a brighter future with this. That we can say, okay, well, we're not where we want to be, obviously.
Right.
But hopefully we have years left. And we have the opportunity to build whatever culture is next for the people that come after us. So I think that that's kind of the core and the heart of what I want out of this conversation is. How can we become that kind of person?
Yeah. Ooh. Well, thank you, first of all, for sharing that with me, though, because there is so much grief in that, just that sheer panic of that whole emotional trauma, not knowing, and then moving, loss of career, all of these things, and then loss of having your trust broken with a one company. Those are all things that we grieve. Because after my mom died, I didn't want to go to church either. And I didn't go for probably 2 months or something, because I was like, no, I don't want to deal with people's comments. I do think part of the problem for us in the church is I don't know where we got this from, but somewhere along the line, we started putting on these masks of I'm fine, I'm good, life is good, we live in the suburbs, we don't have problems, we come to church and we do the right things, and we're just these little perfect people. And I just think, how damaging is that? Because that's not true. People, we're all going through something. We all have struggles and temptations and battles that we're fighting. But for some reason, we feel like we can't just share those things frankly, even though that's what we're called to do as Christians. Share in one another's burdens, right? Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. But for some reason, we feel like, nope, I need to put on a mask. And I feel like part of the solution is, every time you come to church, be authentic, be where you're really at. And if you ask somebody how they are, be prepared for a real answer and show them, model to them by giving a real answer back, right? I committed to that a long time ago of just all right, you're going to ask me how I am. No, I didn't have a great week. I'm struggling with this and I'm just going to be real. I think that the more that we can start to be real with each other and be honest with each other and take those small little risks with things that aren't quite a lot like a big grief. I think when the big griefs come, it's going to be so much easier to go to those people, go to those places and spaces because we've practiced with these smaller things of like, oh man, my boss was really mean to me this week or something, and I don't know how to handle that. Just be real, be honest. We're human beings. God knows our hearts. He sees our state. He knows that we're like up and down. So I don't know where along the line culturally we decided that like putting on these masks was a great thing, but it doesn't actually serve anybody. It doesn't serve the person you're sitting next to, and it doesn't serve ourselves to put on these masks, right? Because we're only stifling our feelings instead of processing them with people in a biblical way. So I think that's part of the first step.
Yeah, it feels like there's a certain status quo to how a church environment is like supposed to be. And like anytime that you deviate from that, or anytime there's a person who doesn't quite fit with that, it's like there's just this evident immediate pressure to return to it.
Yes.
Right? Where it's just like, let's get back to our kind of safe, mundane, don't go too far into, any of the unapproved subjects.
Yeah.
Totally. You know what I mean? Like it just, and that's been true of just about any church that I've been in, of any denomination I've been in.
Yes. Yes.
They might have a variation of what's the norm.
Right.
But whatever the norm is, you just feel as soon as you bring something up that doesn't fit, almost like all the eyes turn on you, or all the pressure to like return to that. And I think that grief is one of those things.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if you're coming in sad, if you're coming in not able to sing the songs like everybody's singing, say the things, be quiet when you're supposed to be quiet, go to this place when we tell you to go to this place. Like, it's very kind of a controlled environment. And if you can't be in that, not only is there pressure to return to the routine, but also if you're not there, you're pressured to come join the routine.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And you're like, I can't do it. I can't conform. I can't. It's too much pressure, especially for a griever.
And that's just kind of, some of the struggle with what church is. You know what I mean? If church is, I come, I listen, I participate in these very limited things, then anything outside of that, which is like 99% of the human experience, we can't do,
right.
And then if we try to do it, suddenly we're disruptive, or we're a problem, or we're rude, or whatever it is, when that's not really the case. Like very few church services that I've been to have really set up time for intentional listening.
Right.
Like, that's not a church thing.
Yeah.
And yet it's a Jesus thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So heartbreaking, because the church is for people in need of a savior, and in need of like healing and hope and understanding, like, look, I can't do it on my own, and I need people and community to come around me. I mean, when we look at the church in scripture, we see that they're like coming around each other and supporting each other with in felt needs and in non-felt and emotional needs. And I love that. If we don't create these opportunities to really get to know one another, to be authentic, to have the harder conversations, I don't know what we're really doing there. We need to change the mindset of like, I go to church to do church. Instead, it needs to be, I go to church to be the church, and I'm going to be the church in this building that we've set aside for the church. But then I'm also going to be the church outside of that space too, in the rest of my life, every day, interacting with people, engaging others, and engaging especially my fellow brothers and sisters. I think that is the key. We need to kind of flip the script, our mindset, and move to being the church versus just doing church.
If you look at this separation, you look at Jesus and you see one very beautiful thing, and you look at your local Christian environment, or even the news about Christianity, and you see such a wide difference.
Totally.
Right? This was one of the things that brought me out of, I left the church for several years that I grew up in. But one of the biggest reasons was just, how do we handle people in pain? Right? Like I'm going to these churches, especially in the area that I was living in at the time, where like almost everybody's low income, right? And you've got just hard life situations, and you've got desperate need. I mean, $100 would make a huge difference in the lives of some of the people that I knew locally. And yet I'm looking at church, and it's like we sing the songs, we listen to the person talk, we come pull weeds or whatever, but it's just kind of this hamster wheel where you're just kind of going through the same thing over and over. And anytime that I would bring up, hey, these people over here can't pay their light bill. Could we like just go over there instead of do church today and help them? Could we do a fundraiser? Like, could we could we offer some kind of daycare for single moms? Like the felt need part, the pain of the community not being addressed and actively being ignored was something that I just couldn't handle.
Yeah.
And, early on that looked like me saying, I can't participate in this. If you're not going to do good, I'll go do good. If the church won't do it, I'll be the church. I'll go do it.
Yeah.
And I'll join people who aren't religious, who are doing good work.
Yeah.
But what it looks like now is saying, no, I'm not letting the church off the hook.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be here and I'm going to instigate for that change.
Yeah.
I'm going to push for that change.
Yeah.
When it comes to grief, what does change look like? Like, what does growth and the formation of the future for those of us who want that better place, who want that safer church environment, active, involved? What's our personal role?
Yeah. I think, first I really do think that we lead with our humanity and we lead from emotion. So we remember that the grieving person can't really handle like our intellectual comments or statements, like, so don't lead from that place.
Yeah.
We need to think about, treat your neighbors as you would treat yourself. What would you like to hear from somebody when you have gone through a hard grief thing? It's important to acknowledge that they're hurting, right?
Yeah.
And just to say like, hey, I see you. Like, I see you. I know you're hurting. I know this thing happened. And further that, and then say something personal to them, like honor who they are. And, I know that you really loved your mom and that you guys were very close. And I can't imagine what that would be like, losing that relationship. Also, just give space. A lot of times when I reach out to somebody who I know has gone through some form of grief, I always will end whatever communication I have with them by just saying like, you don't have to respond even.
Yeah.
Like, I just want you to know I love you. I'm thinking about you. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. I'm willing to walk your dog. I'm willing to wash your dishes, like whatever it is. But you tell me, like you decide. Just know that I'm here. It's letting go of our own agendas about how we should handle someone else's grief and let them tell us what they really need.
Yeah.
And just acknowledge, lead with emotion and love and a personal statement to them, and then just give them space.
Yeah.
And prove that you're willing to do it by honoring that and being like, okay, I'm not gonna keep pushing. Like, when they're ready, they can talk to me about it.
Yeah.
I found that every time I do that, every time I say to somebody in person or over text or phone call, voice message, whatever, that you don't have to respond, I always get a response back because of the relief that they feel of like, wow, thank you for giving me that permission to just be where I'm at.
Yeah.
I think it's really just that simple. Like we have to start giving people permission to be where they're really at. I'm like, hey, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're lacking faith.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you don't love God anymore. You're not going to throw out the whole thing just because you're hurting. It just means this is where you're at.
Yeah.
You're in pain. And that's part of our human experience. That's okay. Jesus grieved. He had pain. He was emotional over sick people and the state of Jerusalem and other things like that. It's okay. It's not wrong. It's not unbiblical, right? To be in our feelings about certain things.
Yeah.
Doesn't show a lack of faith.
Yeah.
So if we can just meet people where they're at and be like, hey, that's normal.
Yep.
But one of the best things that we say in the grief recovery method is grief is normal and natural.
Yeah.
It is the normal and natural response to a loss.
Yeah.
And every time I say that, people are like, that's... I'm like, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. What's unnatural is stifling, right? And so if we can, I think, again, if we can model an unstifled honesty ourselves. That gives other people a subtle permission to do it. And then also when we see someone hurting and just saying like, hey, it's okay. I see you. I got you. I love you. You can lean on my faith even right now. If you're struggling, that's totally cool. Just know I'm here. No pressure. Like, I love you where you're at.
Yep.
I think that's it.
It's interesting, in our current version of the Bible, the shortest verse, 2 powerful words, full sentence, Jesus wept. Right?
Yep.
That's the whole thought. Jesus wept, right? And within those 2 words is such a powerful giant story. Right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's crazy with so little description, like how much emotion that can elicit and bring out just by letting us know that God in human form can grieve.
That's right.
Right? And that, it's not always this controlled, formal, socially ready thing, right? But that our God came down and felt this with us.
That's right. Yes. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And God designed tears for a reason. They do something for us physically, like just that release of emotion. It's just proven to help us. And so they're good. Tears are good. I feel, when we go to church and then you have it as someone in a display of emotion, then everyone's like, what? Kind of thing. And instead we just need to just like honor it. They are doing what they need to do. What do I need to be doing? How can I love them later, then maybe come alongside them? But I think they don't need to like turn and stare at them or anything like that, but just continuously make it okay to display our humanity and who we really are and where we're at and know that that's good.